Alright lads, this video has been made possible due to my YouTube members. Thank you so much to all the gigachads currently on screen. Whereas the F-15 has a fantastic airframe, but is somewhat limited by its weapons, the Su-27 is the complete opposite. It's a rather underwhelming airframe, which is carried heavily by its fantastic selection of weapons, leading to gameplay which in my opinion is very stale and unrewarding. It feels very similar to the old Hunter F6, another plane which was purely carried by its air-to-air capabilities, in the old days of realistic. In real life, the Su-27 was a response to the American FX program. Like the Yankees, the Soviets wanted a high-altitude, high-speed fighter capable of defeating long-range bombers and naval aircraft. What would become the Su-27 was actually flying in the late 70s, but due to a series of rapid, unscheduled aircraft dismantlement, which involved the Soviet test pilots making contact with the ground a little ahead of schedule, the T-10, as it was then called, was delayed. In fact, it wasn't until 1985 that the Su-27 entered limited service with the Soviet Air Forces. And due to the good old Soviet weakness of not knowing how to have a functioning economy, it wasn't until the early 1990s that it entered wide-scale service with Soviet Air Forces. And even then, this is because they were using the tandem seat trainers as frontline units. In truth, the Su-27 was years behind the F-15, still retaining the semi-active radar homing R-27ER until the Su-27 SM was introduced in 2004, which finally gave the Soviets a plane capable of launching a Fox-3 missile, in the form of the R-77. This was jokingly known by the Americans as the Amramsky. Bear in mind, the American AIM-120 entered service in 1991. What this all means is that when Gaijin finally decides to add Fox-3 missiles into the game, this version of the Su-27 will not be able to carry the R-77. Instead, we'll have to grind out another Su-27 in order to get the new missile. How nice of Gaijin. Anyway, in War Thunder, the Su-27 arrives in the 8th rank of the Soviet tech tree. It currently sits at battle rating 12.3, which is a complete joke. Trying to fight this thing in an F4S or Mirage F1C Premium is like a deer trying to fight an 18-wheeler's headlights. To unlock it, you and the collective farm workers are going to have to grind out 410,000 RP before buying it for the cost of 1,100,000 silver lions. But just remember, Tavarish, you don't own it. It's shared between you and the server hamsters. To fly the Su-27, I'd say that the expert and ace qualifications are essential. Despite the American AIM-7M not being up to scratch compared to the 27ER, due to Gaijin's stupid matchmaking where it's just one big civil war, your cheeks are still going to be very at risk of the R-27s fired by other Sukhois and J-11s. It's going to cost you another 1,100,000 silver lines for an expert qualification, and 3,600 golden eagles for the ace. The Su-27 being a tech tree vehicle will come stock, but it is not defenseless, as we get access to two R-73 close-range IR missiles. If we take a quick look at the modifications, and in rank 1 we can unlock the countermeasures. This doesn't actually do anything, as you still have 96 countermeasures with or without this upgrade equipped. Also in rank 1 we have the R-73 upgrade. This allows you to take a maximum of 6 R-73s into a battle, up from the stock 2. In rank 2 and 3 we have access to the R-27T and the R-27R respectively. I personally would recommend focusing on unlocking the missile upgrades for this plane, as this is best described as a missile boat, only trying to unlock the engine and performance modifications when you need to unlock the next rank. Finally, for rank 4 we have the R-27ET, which is needed to unlock the R-27ER, arguably your most feared weapon. Luckily for you though, and unlike the F-15 which I covered last time, the Su-27 does have quite a wide range of air-to-ground weapons, which can speed up your grind. We have a large selection of bombs and rockets, but the rockets can only be carried on the inner wing pylons, so no rocket spamming bases for you, comrade. So lads, is the Su-27 worth adding to your arsenal, or is it just a new, shiny flashy jet which Gaijin is going to make redundant in the next update, just like they did to the MiG-23 MLD, the F-16A, and recently the MiG-29. The The Su-27, just like the MiG-29 before it, is probably most feared for its beyond visual range performance. But in my opinion, one of the biggest weaknesses of this plane is its radar. It's an absolute pain in the balls trying to lock an enemy with the flanker's #1 radar suite. While on paper, it boasts good range, in practice, it very rarely locks onto the aircraft you're looking at. Instead, locking onto some random teammate on the very edge of your radar scope. I've died several times trying to do a Fox 1 joust, because my radar decided to lock the guy 15 kilometers behind the guy I'm trying to lock, and then dying to another R27ER. The radar has a single scope scale of 60 by 30 degrees. This is quite narrow, but when you acquire a lock, that scope scale increases drastically, allowing you to pull around 60 degrees off the nose of the target, allowing you to go somewhat defensive against an enemy who is also locking you. But it's still not a perfect 90 degrees, so you will not be able to notch a missile and maintain a lock on your enemy. The plane also has several radar modes available. We have pulse Doppler search, track while scan, pulse Doppler head-on, and track while scan head-on. Only the pulse Doppler search mode is really useful, and because this is the default radar setting, there's no need to touch your radar at the start of a match. The flanker also gets a radar gun sight, giving you a pipper on the UI, showing you where to aim your main gun. This is incredibly handy during a dogfight, especially unlike American jets, which benefit from capitalism's ability to produce lots of ammunition. The Su-27 only has 150 rounds available for its 30mm cannon. Another neat feature borrowed from the MiG-29 is the helmet-mounted display. The HMD, in combination with the R-73, makes both you and the MiG incredibly lethal jets in a merge, at least for the first 2 turns. Not only does the HMD allow you to slave your IR missile seekers, but you can also slave the radar, allowing you to, theoretically, choose which enemy you want to lock. I found that using the radar with the HMD was far more reliable than using the radar's own search feature. In general though, the radar of the Sukhoi felt like a couple of steps behind the radar in the 15 or the 16. While it performs well against enemies up high where there's no background clutter, against enemies trying to spot squirrels, the radar was both awkward and liked to lose lock frequently. This makes your wonder weapon a lot more difficult to use, at least against enemies who know what they're doing. We have 2 different types of semi-active radar missiles available on this jet. The first is the R27R. This has a maximum speed of Mach 3.5 and a maximum overload of 35 Gs. Not a bad missile by itself. But then we get the ER. This has the exact same seeker, but has a much more powerful rocket motor, accelerating the missile to a maximum speed of Mach 5.8. Both of these weapons are fantastic for medium range engagements, but only the ER has the legs to be used as a true BVR weapon. Regardless though, the ER's longer range isn't really what makes it useful. The main advantage is the speed. The 27ER will close with the enemy far faster, giving them less time to maneuver and create an effective countermeasure screen. Both the R27R and the R27ER are very effective against enemies that are above you. It reminds me of the good old days of the F-40 domination, back in another golden age of War Thunder. But against enemies who are low to the ground, the radar of your plane and the seeker in the missile itself has a very hard time tracking the enemy, and a competent pilot will always be able to defeat an R27ER, given they have enough time and are close enough to the deck. Because of this, I've been more favouring the R27ET. The ET has the exact same kinematic performance of an ER, but instead uses an infrared seeker with a very strong IRCCM system. Whereas the guidance system of the ER can be affected by low altitude enemies, this is not an issue for the infrared guidance system of the ET, which has led it to being a lot more useful in my opinion than the ER, strangely enough. The War Thunder community has adapted really. You don't really get people climbing high anymore, so having long range, incredibly flare resistant infrared missiles, it also almost seems more impressive to me than the R27ERs, and I wish I could take a lot more than just 2. Having a Mach 6 infrared missile, which is basically unable to be flared, certainly is a huge W for this Sukhoi. The hardpoints located on the fuselage of the aircraft can only be used for firing the R27 radar guided types, but the 2 inner wing pylons can be used for either the IR or the radar guided R27. This means you can only take a maximum of 2 R27ETs into battle, or alternatively you can take 6 R27ERs. you cannot take more than 2 of the IR-guided R-27s into a match. This is due to the fuselage hardpoints not using ejector rails, instead dropping the missile before the rocket motor fires, similar to how the AIM-54 Phoenixes are launched. This type of launch obviously cannot be used for IR missiles, which require a lock before launch. But what about our 4 outer wing hardpoints? Well, these are reserved for the R-73s. These are another advanced infrared missile. Whereas the R-27ET was incredibly long range, the R-73s are decidedly shorter range. While they lack in the legs though, they make up for in maneuverability. The R-73s are thrust vectoring missiles, meaning they have insane off-the-rail turning abilities. In my opinion, the R-73s are a lot less lethal than the AIM-9Ms in medium-range engagements, but in the granted, quite rare dogfights in top tier, there is no better missile to have than the R-73. So we have fantastic missiles. I think if you've played top tier aerialistic in the last week, you probably know just how strong the Su-27's offensive capabilities are. But what about the performance? Well, the performance of the Sukhoi certainly isn't a highlight. There's nothing particularly charming about this plane's flight model. Even the biggest Vatnik cope of Macabre remover isn't really that helpful in an actual fight. The second you pull any sort of AOA in this plane, you're going to start bleeding speed like an F1 car in a gravel trap. While the poor energy retention affects your ability to perform sustained turns, there is an upside. It does allow you to reverse people quite effectively, as it is very easy for you to bleed speed, meaning most enemies will enter the merge with at least a bit more energy than you do. This should allow you to at least somewhat turn inside of them, and then use your helmet mounted display to force feed them an R-73. But if you miss this R-73 shot in the merge, then your fate is pretty much sealed. In a sustained turn fight, you will basically fall out of the sky. You are essentially a MiG-29 SMT, except you have a Sukhoi serial number. So keep your speed up, don't get baited into a merge, just fake a turn, disengage, and try and run away to your remaining friendly fighters. The Su-27 is also airframe limited. It will rip its own wings at around Mach 1.25 on the deck, which to be fair is very fast. It's a lot faster than the F-15, which will top out at Mach 1.19, but the Eagle is engine limited and will not rip its own wings in a straight line. So swings and roundabouts really. The engines of the Su-27 produce 11,660 kilos of thrust when afterburning. This is notable for being significantly more powerful than the F-15's engines, which only produce 8,520 kilos of thrust. But the Su-27 is one chunky boy, weighing nearly 4 tons heavier than the F-15. Whereas the F-15 has a climb rate of 330 meters per second, the Sukhoi can only manage a climb rate of 225 meters per second. Not bad per se, especially for a plane rocking 10 advanced air-to-air missiles, but the Su-27 certainly is no kinematic masterpiece. We've covered our air-to-air capabilities, both in terms of weapons and performance, but what about our air-to-ground? Well, compared to the F-15, the Sukhoi is blessed when it comes to pissing off Leopard players, but compared to the MiG-29 SMT, the Su-27's is in many ways a step backwards. Gone are the self-guiding air-to-ground weapons, replaced by a wider range of dumbfire bombs and rockets. For the bombs, it's honestly nothing special. We have a variety of 250 and 500 kilo bombs in both freefall and high drag variants. We also have napalm for some reason. The rockets are where things get a bit spicy though, as we have some of the shared weaponry from the Su-25. Again, these rockets can only be carried on the inner wing pylons, which drastically limits the amount of weapons you can carry. You are most likely going to be supplementing these rockets with the bombs, which can be carried on the centerline fuselage hardpoints. The S8 KOs are nothing special, but each pod holds 20 rockets, meaning you can take 80 into a battle, a lot more than the next two weapons. If you ever played top tier tanks when the KA-52 spam was a thing, you're probably familiar with the S13OFs. These use a liquid high explosive warhead, capable of penetrating over 60mm of armor, basically a one-shot weapon if it hits the roof of an MBT. While it's very powerful, each pod only holds 5 rockets, limiting you to 20 rockets per flight. And finally, we have the big boy, the S25O. These contain nearly 60 kilos of TNT, giving you over 70mm of penetration per rocket. Unlike the Su-25, which can carry only one S-25 per pylon, the Su-27 can carry 2, allowing you to take up to 4 of these monsters into a match. Regardless of the impressive rockets we're able to carry, the Su-27 lacks any kind of precision guided munition, in my opinion ruling it out of being an effective close-air support jet in ground realistic. But do not cry, dear viewer, the Soviets still have the K-52 and the MiG-27K. Instead, the ground ordnance on the Sukhoi should be used to expedite your grind. So boys, to conclude, the Su-27 is very disappointing to me. While you can and will easily get high kill games, the plane is very reflective on my opinion of realistic battles in general. It is stale and completely lacking a sense of soul. Top tier realistic battles are mind-numbing to me. There is no skill whatsoever. Most kills are pure luck determined by game mechanics rather than player action. Again, I am by no means a good pilot whatsoever. Maybe I'm missing something, but the draw of top tier is nowhere near as good as it used to be. It feels like people play top tier RB just to unlock new things, not because they actually enjoy the gameplay loop. But if you want a Soviet jet that gets lots of kills pretty easily, then the Su-27 is a fantastic plane. Just keep it fast and try to stick near teammates. An isolated Sukhoi is a dead Sukhoi, as your kinematics will not save you. The Su-27 should be flown like an overgrown MiG-29 SMT. It is a missile truck with a theoretical ability to dogfight. It is unsuitable for ground realistic battles due to the need to be close to the battle to deploy its bombs and rockets, but these air-to-ground munitions can be used to grind more effectively in RB. Anyway lads, that's the end of the video. A big thank you to all my YouTube members. The channel just would not be possible without the support of you guys. So a special thank you to Lola Alfonsi, Tans, Doboa LX, Dr. Bob, Tomster013, RS28 Sarmat, Pumpin, Schlunty, Van Halen, Diogenes, our newest YouTube member, Econ. Big thank you again lads. If you watch this video all the way to the end, leave a comment saying flank and spank. While it certainly is possible to have ace matches in the Su-27, I found myself very rarely having any fun. I'll personally stick to clubbing in ground dualistic battles.